Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Mastodon's Bookshelf. Today is January 16th, 2014, and this is the third installment of Reading Corner for the year. Today I am continuing on with reading Demon Cat. We're on part 3 now. One more part to go after this, so hopefully you'll stick around for that and have been enjoying it so far. Because it's the third part, I'll have a link to the first and the second parts just in case you haven't seen those yet or you want to catch up on what's happened already. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you next time. The 5 cultists started moving, taking action after their newly arrived leader finished speaking. They spread out around the bloody circle scrawled on the floor, clasping hands so that they held each other's wrists and their palms were pressed together to form a chain that encircled the 6th cultist and the women in the middle. The leader held a knife in his hand, the blade curved and cruel. Starting with the cultist nearest him, he pressed the point of the blade into the center of the man's chest. The leader began walking counterclockwise, the knife dragging through the cultist's clothing. The coarse brown fabric drooped open as it was cut, revealing the red line where the blade sliced through flesh. There were no sounds of pain. None of the men grunted or groaned. The leader did this around the circle, cutting each of the 5 men from wrist to wrist. Blood oozed down their chests, ran along their arms, and dripped from their wrists. After making his way around the circle, the leader knelt down in front of the crying woman. She shut her eyes and turned her face away from him. He grabbed her chin and twisted her face back to him. He reached up with his other hand, and she cringed away from him, biting harder into the gag that kept her silent. He laughed at her fear. The cultists who formed the chain around the circle began chanting. The rough, unintelligible words echoed through the space. The leader spoke in that language which seemed to live in his throat, and ran his hand across the woman's pregnant belly. She shied away from his touch, but her bonds kept her from moving. He lifted his hand, and a black vapor followed it upwards. The woman's eyes opened, and she looked at the men in horror before she began to scream through the gag. Greg had been focused on the vapor, which had begun lazily circling above their heads. The noise brought his attention back to the women, and he was taken aback. She was no longer pregnant. Her clothing hung loosely from her body. Greg watched numbly, mouth agape, as she twisted and pulled against the ropes. She fell onto her side, pulling her knees tightly up against her chest, something she wouldn't have been able to do just moments before. Working his way around the circle of women, the leader continued stealing the babies from the women's bellies. A black cloud appeared above their heads as he did so. It swirled angrily as if fueled by the cries from the women below. The first woman passed out. Greg thought she had simply screamed until she had fainted. He noticed the amount of blood on the floor. There was so much that he didn't know where it was all coming from. The entire inside of the circle was turning into one big pool of blood. Droplets began to lift up from the ground, defying gravity, and floated upwards into the cloud. The cloud raged harder, and more liquid lifted upwards, turning the air into a solid curtain of blood. The curtain lifted, the last of the droplets disappeared into the cloud, and with it they had taken all that had been inside the circle. The women and the men were gone. All that was left was the cloud. The cloud rolled and turned. A light began to grow in the center, and then it spread to the sides of the circle like an eye slowly opening. As the light spread, sounds began to emanate from it, and all he could think of was screams amidst a rock fall. The dark cloud was gone, replaced by a blinding disk of light. Greg could barely look at it, it was so bright. And then things started to drop out of it, as if they were materializing out of the air. The first fell to the floor, its hooves striking with a pair of staccato clacks. Thick was the best way to describe the thing, especially its hands. They seemed built for crushing. Shaggy hair covered its body, obscuring most of its features, but a hooked beak poked through where a mouth should be. Another creature materialized out of the portal. It was smaller, but covered in spines like a porcupine, glistening a rusty brown under the fluorescent lights. A third kind of monster appeared with a bellow. It had bat-like wings that stretched out, blocking out the lights. Pointed tusks curled out of the sides of its mouth. More and more came from the portal. Demons, devils, nightmares, horrors, all kinds of monstrosities. They swarmed outwards like an invasion force from a horror film as they took stock of their surroundings. The cat stood beside Greg. He didn't know where the cat had come from. It lifted its clawed paw and spread its fingers. In front of them, the hooved monster ruptured. The cat raised its other paw, and the spine demon erupted, sending barbs flying in all directions. Greg flinched, reflexively covering his face. The demons turned to the cat, noticing it for the first time. The winged creature shrieked and pounced with its long, bat-like fingers stretched for the cat. A wolf-like monster that had just come through the portal bounded around the bat creature and lunged for the cat at the same time. Again, the cat raised its hands, and the two demons exploded like their predecessors. Gore surrounded them as chunks of foul flesh, and grey-blue blood flew from the exploding creatures. He had thought the smell of open sewers was bad enough, but this smelled like he had fallen in. His body revolted against the assault on his senses, and he retched noisily, though the sounds of his discomfort were lost in the chaos. A voice was in Greg's head. "Join with me, and together we can destroy them." It didn't seem to matter how easily the cat had destroyed the monsters, as different demons came out of the portal and replaced them. Greg lost count of how many creatures had come out of the portal. 12? 2? More? It was an unrelenting tide that clambered over the growing piles of limbs and parts. The monsters were just as likely to scoop the remains of the dead into their mouths as they were to try and attack the cat. It was pure chaos, and yet there were no signs that the horde coming through the portal would let up. The cat's voice was in Greg's head again, but it was softer this time. "I weaken. Join with me, and together we can stop them. Do not, and let your world perish, for this is just the beginning." "What? How?" Greg asked. "Take of me. Become the vessel for my power." "Why?" "I cannot exist in your world, not to my true extent. Take my power and repel those who threaten your world, or let the underworld powers run rampant." "I don't understand," he protested. "You seem real to me." Another set of demons ruptured as if to prove the point. "I am a shadow, unable to manifest to my fullest. Without an anchor I will fade away. Become the embodiment of my power, and prevent the massacre of your world." "How can I trust you?" "You saw what they did. What other choice do you have?"